Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. Welcome to Eileen's office hours. I am not Eileen, as you can as you can tell. She's in Paris right now, enjoying a very beautiful looking apartment, which I saw on her Instagram this morning. And so while she's away, I'm just stepping in, and I'm just thought I would do an office hours on anything to do with editing. And I wanted to kind of keep it wide open, get at people's, niggling questions, their deepest insecurities, whatever you want to talk about, whether it's about a comma, an apostrophe, whether it's about really big macro issues with your manuscript, whether it's about the process. I did solicit some questions before, so I have my list of questions that people sent, but I'm happy to, I guess, start off with whoever wants to start. If anyone came armed with any questions, I'm happy to pass it over to you, so fire away.
So sorry, Amanda, are you a full-time editor or is this something you do part-time?
I do it part-time. I mean, basically I work part-time, but this is my job. Just to give you a little background, I come from sort of the academic field. So I started, I did 3 degrees in history. I got my PhD and I published a book, an academic book, a couple of years ago, and I taught at SFU for several years on mostly modern British and European history. I loved it. It was really great. But it was actually through meeting Crystal and joining what was then the Greater Vancouver chapter of Romance Writers of America that I started to think about changing streams. And I actually found that, I'd obviously had lots of experience as an academic writer, but I actually found that editing was a really seamless fit. And I think when you have an academic background, you're sort of trained to think that this is the only thing you can do. This is it. This is where you're headed. This is where you're going. And then you have to really sort of pick yourself up and go, no, I have basically learned all these sort of what I would say are invisible skills that I can apply to other fields. So with editing, it really was about, I had lots of experience with the written word. So in terms of the mechanical stuff, I had a pretty good grasp. I did take some editing courses through SFU continuing studies to brush up and make sure that I was on the mark with most of my skills. But one of the biggest things that transferred over was just a passion for analyzing texts. There's so much analysis. It's really about learning to sort of deconstruct somebody's argument to really uncover what they're getting at. And a lot of academic writers are brilliant minds, but not necessarily amazing writers. And because they don't learn to write, or they do, they just learn by doing, they learn by watching other people. But there's a huge disparity. And I feel like sometimes some of the things that are considered the greatest works of history are actually considered that because they're just so well written. And so they're just more persuasive and they stick in people's minds longer. Those things are really important. And so I edit all kinds of stuff. I do edit nonfiction. I do edit dissertations and that sort of thing, but I love editing fiction and creative nonfiction. And yeah, a lot of stuff about story, it's surprisingly similar in certain ways. You're getting at theme, you're getting at symbolism. You still need to be persuaded. You still, for example, want to, in a lot of cases, you want to be rooting for the hero or the heroine. And the writer has to sort of persuade the reader to do that. So yeah, a lot of those skills.
Would you
But thank
call
you.
yourself a developmental editor and a copy editor, or more on the copy editor side? Or
I would say both for sure. But I started off doing copy editing. And I think it's a little bit of a myth because I've said this before, but I feel like developmental editing is sort of like sometimes considered to be a higher status editing, you know, because it's about making big macro changes. And I think also it's about talking to the author and suggesting major changes to their story, which some authors might find a little more, you know, trust is really important. But I actually find like copy editing is so, so important. And it is in a lot of ways much more, it can be much more time consuming. You have to get so intimately involved in the language. You have to really go through it sentence by sentence. So to me, they are really on a par. That's just my take on it. But I do both, and I love both for their own special reasons. Obviously, I love getting into story and digging deep and all that kind of stuff. And I also love copy editing. The comparison I always make is once I went and got a manicure done, and I asked the woman doing the manicure, I said, what's your favorite thing to do? What's your favorite sort of aesthetic service to provide to clients? And she said pedicures. And I was really surprised. I was like, geez, like I would think that would be one of my least favorite things would be to work with people's feet, you know? And she said, no, she said, it's so rewarding because the difference between what you start with and what you finish with is huge. You know, people's feet look and feel so much better when I'm done with them that it's just very rewarding. And that's how I feel as a copy editor. It's like, I feel like I'm making a difference. So yeah. So yeah, I do both. And I also do stylistic editing, and I often do stylistic and copy edits together. And I think stylistic editing is huge too. And some people...
Sorry, can you define stylistic editing?
Sure, that's a really great question. The easiest way to think about stylistic versus developmental versus copy editing is to look at sort of the unit of analysis. So with developmental editing or structural editing, you're looking at the whole piece a lot of the time. You're looking at, for example, the entire story arc, or you're looking at you know, how the character changes from the beginning to the middle to the end. You know, big questions about setting, whatever. And so you're looking at the forest. Copy editing, people often say that's where you're working at the sentence level. So you're saying, does this sentence work? Is the punctuation properly applied? You know, or it does, for example, does the sentence adhere to the chosen style for this work? You know, if the author is writing using American English, for example, I've got to make sure that, you know, everything is spelled in an American style. The punctuation is, the quotation marks are American style and not British style, that the numbers are spelled out or not spelled out, all those tiny things. Stylistic editing also works at the sentence level, but it also works at the paragraph level. And really, stylistic editing is about flow. That's how I would describe it. It's not necessarily about the mechanical edits, about something that is correct or incorrect. It's about, does this work? When I read this page, when I read this paragraph, does it just flow and I don't even notice I don't even notice the language because I'm so immersed in the story? That's kind of what you want. You want it so that you just read it and it goes really quickly. And if there's anything that gives me pause, I might go, this sentence is correct, right? But it's really long, or it's awkward, or I don't, I had a puzzle. I have to figure it out. What is wrong with the sentence? Why is it not working? Bonnie, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was wondering if that's related to voice. Like, is that how you would edit for voice, the stylistic edit?
It can be. It can be for sure a matter of voice, or things like, yeah, head hopping, or, all of a sudden I've been pulled out of this story. It might be about pacing. It might be about, well, they're having a phone conversation, and that phone conversation is getting too long. All right, well, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Okay, have a great day. Okay, you too. See you later. Goodbye. And it's like a stylistic editor will say, well, this might be punctuated and is spelled correctly, but you can cut out the last 5 lines of this phone conversation because nobody needs to read it. Yeah, and so stylistic edits tend to be, they tend to be more subjective, right? Because the author might come back and say, I really liked the last line of that phone conversation. I thought it was really funny. I thought it, or whatever it may be. And of course, that's great. It's up to the author's discretion to decide to make that final decision. But as an editor, I say, look, if something is going to give me pause, I'm going to mention it. I'm going to flag it, or I'm going to see if I can try to make this smoother. And, you can do with it what you want. Maybe you don't like that idea. Or oftentimes what it will be is that the author will actually say, no, I don't like what you've done, but I can see what you're saying. So here's another idea. So now I'm going to fix it in my own way. And I think that's even better than what I suggested, and that's great. So it just gets you thinking about it. I don't know if does that make sense? Marianne, did you?
Yeah, on the subject of stylistic editing, every time you read, I mean, one of the reasons we choose favorite authors has something to do with the voice and the pacing and the maybe emotional tone of the story, mm-hmm. regardless of which genre you prefer. And one of the things that I often puzzle about is when I really enjoy the language and the way a story is told, I want to take it apart and understand what they're doing and understand, what I'm not doing that would achieve a similar satisfactory product. Mm-hmm. And yet I find that exercise quite difficult and frustrating. And I was wondering if that's ever anything that you've done, like take a finished manuscript and maybe a client's manuscript and say, this is how what they're doing is different than what you're doing in a broader sort of way, so that if you were aiming for a certain market or a certain kind of voice, or you wanted to improve the pacing, or say suspense and tension in a mystery or action novel or something like that, right? Something with a specific genre, like maybe humor or maybe something else. Can you take apart a successful manuscript and say, here is what they're doing that works, that achieves that particular end result?
Well, a little bit. I would say, I mean, I might bring up an element of something. I might say, for example, you've written what is kind of a hard-boiled psychological thriller, for example. And it's a great story, it's a great plot. But maybe from an editorial perspective, I might say it feels a little long. It feels maybe a little long and I might say, well, if you look at, this book, you can see how they've taken, maybe the same kind of set piece idea where it's maybe about the psychological play between just a very small number of characters. But you can see that this book is actually quite short. It's 150 pages or whatever. But I try to be really careful about that. If the client really requests that kind of feedback, that's great. But I think there's also, on the other hand, So there's a couple of things I guess I'd say to this. One is I really like to follow the author's voice and style and what's already there. And I feel like every writer has tendencies. Every writer has, sort of seemingly natural predisposition to do certain things. And sometimes those things might be things as an editor that I would watch out for, or that I would try to correct, or that I would try to reduce instances of. Maybe they repeat certain things a lot. Maybe there's just a certain idiosyncrasy about their writing that coming from the outside can be a little jarring. So maybe I'll try to soften it. But on the other hand, I feel like every writer has at least one or two really great strengths. So even if maybe they're a new writer, maybe they still have a lot to learn. Maybe this story isn't necessarily going to be a masterpiece, but they're really good. Like there's always something where I was like, wow, they are really good at, describing setting or establishing mood or they have a real emotion in their writing that for the life of me, I cannot recreate in my own work, that they just have a knack for that. And so I will tend to, in that case, part of me is like, it's my job to play to those strengths. I want to then really polish up those elements, that strength that makes their voice so distinctive or powerful. And I'll try to sort of focus on that instead of focusing on what someone else is doing. Now, of course, there is still mechanical issues. There's issues of genre. And in those cases, Marianne, yes, you're absolutely right. I might, point to another author working in that genre, and I might point out very specific particular things. But the second part of that is that I'm very wary because it's sort of easy to look at what, and you see this all the time. I'm going to illustrate this issue, but look at how Charles Dickens did it. And, look at how good he was at, doing XYZ, or, some amazing writer from history. And it's like, if only it could be more like this. And it's like, well, I feel like sometimes when you do that, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're like, oh, there's no way I'll ever be this good. There's no way I'll ever be able to write like this author that I love and is a master of their craft in this particular way. So I try not to sort of set up that kind of comparison, because I'm not sure how helpful it is in the end, and it may even end up being more discouraging. But as far as specific things, yes, you're right. I might bring out like, a single sentence or one small aspect, or I could say, read this person. I really like the way this person does it, and kind of leave it up to them at that point. But I try not to be too prescriptive. Does that help? Does that make sense? Yeah. Anyway. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious whether it was a doable exercise. I mean, say a client came to you with a manuscript in a specific genre niche and said, I like my story, but it doesn't read the way I think my readers would best enjoy it. I want it to be faster or lighter or more emotional or funnier or something. How can I make it more like that? Like,
Right.
what am I doing? It's not that it's better or worse. It's just like, it's a flavor thing, right? So like, what ingredients should I add to my stew to make it taste more like that? So I'm often looking at my own writing and trying to figure out what ingredients are missing, or what I've got, what I've been too heavy-handed with. But I can't see it, I can't see it. So I'm just wondering whether that's a kind of exercise that an objective editor could do if asked to.
Yeah, I think they can, especially in their capacity as of somebody coming at the manuscript fresh.
Mm.
Sometimes I feel like as an editor, I have a few special skills, but sometimes I feel like one of my biggest strengths is just that I've never read your manuscript before. and and like the way you just said it, the way you just explained it, that is a great thing to bring to an editor. That's a great conundrum, it's to say before they read it, to say, look, this is something I'm struggling with. This whatever element, and you probably, as you say, you probably know what those elements are that you want to strengthen. And so bringing that to an editor beforehand is a great thing to do, because then that will be planted in their brain, and they'll think about it, and they'll try to puzzle through solutions as they read through your manuscript. So I absolutely do think, it's definitely a worthwhile thing.
At the very least, you would learn things about your own style, and then be able to maybe somewhat more objectively decide if that's the thing you wanted to cultivate or crop out somehow.
And and maybe
your own writing.
Absolutely,
and have that objectivity.
Absolutely. And I do think, I even sometimes say to clients, I said, you can send me a synopsis, but I'm quite happy to start editing without knowing anything about the story. I'm quite happy to come at it like a reader initially anyway, and see how it unfolds, to see what I notice, to see what I miss, without being armed beforehand with the sort of story of, this is what I was trying to do, this is what I want to happen in this story, this is what, once I have that information, well, then that might be what I'm going to see, which is going to be less helpful for you overall, because you want that totally fresh perspective, that kind of untutored perspective. So it's a balance for sure. But that's a great question.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm in a writer's circle, and everybody else does editing for a living.
Oh, aren't you lucky, or unlucky, as the case may be?
I'm not so sure. I'm not sure. Is that lucky or not? Because often I'm looking for developmental or stylistic comments. How does it feel? Does it make sense? But they can't get by, most of them, and they're wonderful, but they can't get by the commas, the apostrophes, or the numbers, whether they're spelt or numeric. So I guess I'm asking you whether or not there's a source, because I'm not very good at that stuff. So, but I'm like I would say I'm very good, at story and emotion and internal thoughts and all that jazz, but not the factual part of writing. So is there a source I can go to that will easily and very clearly tell me about the rules for Canada, I guess, commas, numbers, and apostrophes?
Yes, there's lots of sources.
Yeah.
And I can talk about a couple of them.
Okay. But
one thing I will say is you're the best kind of writer, because from an editorial perspective, I'm like, you don't need to don't worry about that stuff. If you're in a writing circle with a bunch of editors, ask them to do it for you if they want to do it so much. It's much more important for you to be a great storyteller. And I think everyone's heard stories of, famous multi-million selling authors who maybe aren't amazing mechanical writers, right? But they can tell a good story. And so it doesn't matter, because they have editors who can do the mechanical stuff. And so in that sense, it's like, that's okay. That's totally fine. There are tons of sources. And I think, who was it? Oh, actually, it was one of Odette's questions, which was, what's your favorite source to use as a reference? What's your favorite grammar book? And one hand, I would say, in some senses, I don't have a favorite. I don't have one. I'm not huge on them, but there are not so much grammar books, but there are style guides. And this is where the topic of punctuation, grammar, all the copy editing stuff, this is where it gets tricky because there are lots of different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things the editor does in conjunction with the author is to decide on a style for your work. And it depends on what country which country's usage and spelling you're going to adopt, whether you're going to do Canadian or whether you're going to do American, or maybe you're going to do British. And I feel like that's especially hard for Canadian writers because our system is distinct, but it also incorporates elements of the American and British systems. And I think we grow up reading and learning in those other systems a lot. So it does make it confusing. Yeah, but there are some good ones. And for Canadian style, actually, and this is something that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with, there's a website, and I'll post it. Maybe I'll post it after office hours, called The Canadian Style. And it's like a government website, essentially. And actually, I think I have it bookmarked here. So I wonder, how do I do I have done a screen share before, but I can't quite remember how to do. Oh, here we go. Is this screen? Oh, gosh, screen share. No, I'm going to go to, hold on. These are the sort of technical things that I'm supposed to figure out here. Hold on.
Set so that you can do it.
Oh yeah, desktop one. Well, here we go. Hold on.
Yeah.
It's giving me all these options, and I'm not seeing the option that I actually want.
Usually you just pick your Internet Explorer or your whatever you're using.
That's right.
Whichever window has the website open, you just click on that.
Yeah, no, it's not. Oh, it's, well, here's, here, there we go.
Yay.
All right. So are you seeing this, this government website? Okay, great. So you can see this is Public Works and Government Services Canada. You have to Google it. It's really not, to find it is not that intuitive, but yeah, it's called The Canadian Style. And if you see in the sidebar here, it's very concise. It's not overwhelming, but you can actually see how this would be your standard government, government Canadian style. But it does have a lot of great, great sort of rules of thumb. So you can go to capitalization, and it'll say this is when you capitalize. You capitalize the first word of a sentence. It gives you examples. Capitalize the first word after a colon if it begins a direct question. And again, this is a style thing. Other style guides are going to say, don't do that. But this is one particular style. This is sort of the Canadian government style. That's number E, right? So letter G, capitalize the first words of truisms and mottos run into text. His watchword was, learn to write well or not to write at all. So this is like they're giving you a style for all of these things, for when to spell out numbers, whatever it is. So so that's one example. There are lots of other ones for doing fiction, although this is not technically a Canadian style guide. A lot of writers don't write in Canadian, they write in American. And even if they're writing in Canadian, I will use, I like Chicago. I like the Chicago Manual of Style. And I've got it right here. Oh, it's really big. It's really big. So this is the 16th edition. And this might be something you might look at and go, oh my gosh, I don't even want to go there, which is fine because you can get your editor to go there. But what I love about the Chicago Manual style is that it's really comprehensive. It has not the answers to everything, especially if you're writing fiction. There's fiction things that might have but it has the answers to a lot. So it covers things that other style guides don't even mention, don't even talk about. So very often when I edit fiction, I'll pick a dictionary. So I'll pick like the Oxford Canadian Dictionary, for example, if you're writing in Canadian, which will have Canadian spellings in it, versus American or British spellings. But I will often choose a usage guide, so a style guide, and so that's what Chicago is. So yeah, that's probably not a satisfactory answer because you want one handy dandy key, but really it's about determining your own handy dandy key. And that's actually one thing that editors do when they edit a manuscript is they write up a style sheet saying this is how we're going to do things. And again, it's up to the author to help the editor decide what they want to do, but it's like this is how we're going to do things. We're going to spell out numbers up to 100, and round numbers over 100 such as 300 or 1000. But we will use the numerical version for numbers like 126, 755, 111th Street, for example. And yeah, so a lot of copy editing is that kind of thing. And really, it doesn't matter what style you use as long as you're consistent, as long as you do it the same within your work or within your series, you're golden. That's the thing. There's not always a right answer to those questions. That's the tricky part.
Well, thank you. I wish the people in my group all feel that very strongly about their way, though.
That's right.
So they can't really see my developmental, my story developing until they get it calm in their hearts, which means, managing it to their style.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it is. And I actually find, I will sometimes have a client ask, can you do a developmental and a kind of sort of like a combined edit where you're doing developmental editing and you're also doing copy editing? And the answer is not really. And there's lots of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that as an editor, it's very hard it's like I'm using two different parts of my brain. And so if I'm doing developmental editing, I very consciously shut down the copy editing part of my brain. I am not going to touch that. I am not going to comment on it. I'm not going to flag it because then I'm just going to get stuck in that mode. And I need to focus on the story and just the story. So it's a challenge.
What Kit said raised a question for me, and I think it falls into the stylistic editing zone, but it affects copy editing. Mm-hmm. And that is because there are all sorts of examples of this, very accomplished examples of this, but to what extent do fiction authors have the latitude to basically throw out all the rules or make their own rules? Or, we do it all the time. We use incomplete sentences. We punctuate in all sorts of weird ways. And I remember reading an essay somewhere about commas in particular, which caused everybody grief. But basically saying the comma wasn't, actually it was Mary Robinette Kowal's workshop at Surrey a couple years ago. I don't know if you were there. But she was saying that basically punctuation was invented to add pauses and breaths to writing. Because, you don't technically need them at all except to kind of give people clues about where it's okay to stop and take a breath. And so because of that, I often think, I don't care what anybody else thinks about commas. I'm going to put a small pause. And I'm going to put a period wherever I want, a bigger pause. And I don't care about Strunk and White. It's not, it's like, or whoever, you know, the grammar rules. This is my story, and I want you to absorb it the way I intended. So I don't know. I mean, like, am I off base there, or do you think that that's, or like how famous do you have to be before you say, I'm going to do it my way?
Right. Oh, this is such a great question. I feel like a lot of people deep down have that have that question. You know, they're like, why is she changing all this stuff? You know, and yeah, it's a really valid question. It's really good. And I'm actually really glad you also used the example you did about the commas, because I did get one question about commas in particular, that commas are very confusing, and they are confusing. They're confusing to me too. Yeah. So there's a little bit to unpack here, but where do I start? I had a student once when I was teaching. I learned a lot about editing by grading student papers. And a lot about the relationship between an editor and a writer. And I had one student come in and they said, as far as I'm concerned, language is my playground. And it was sort of this idea that, like, I should have freer reign with how I write and what I write. And in a way, I'm like, that's a really nice thought. It is a playground. It's a beautiful place to be sometimes. But sometimes you do have to make sure you know the rules before you can break them, which is something that a lot of people have said before. You know, if you want to break the rules, you have to know what the rules are and sort of know why you're breaking them. That's one thing I could say, which is, it's good to know the correct way before you start going hog wild. And yeah, but on the other side of the coin, I think probably one of the best editing rules is, if you can get away with it, you can do whatever you want. The key is, of course, if you can get away with it, which a lot of times you can't, or a lot of times you think you are getting away with it when you're reading it to yourself, because you know what you're saying. You know what you want to say. You know how you would say it out loud if you were going to read it out loud. But then as soon as someone else sits down and reads it, you can realize, wow, they are reading it totally differently than how I thought I was writing it, or how I intended it, or how I would do it. And that's where it gets tricky. And so to take the example of commas, you know, one thing I would say is, don't use the take a breath rule. I think that's really dangerous. And I think, because you could get an actor and they could say a sentence in 100 different ways, and every different way they could be taking a perfectly legitimate sounding breath or pause, and still carry that sentence off and still make it sound good or make it sound different. But that doesn't help your 1,000 or 100,000 or 1 million readers who are all coming at that text from a different place or in a different way. So it is good to know the rules. But, and what I would sort of amend what Mary Robinette said about why punctuation was invented. To me, it's like punctuation and commas especially are all about clarity. You want to enhance the clarity of the sentence. And sometimes that means breaking the rules, because sometimes a sentence, if you were going to follow correct comma usage, that sentence might have 4 or 5 commas in it. And that in itself is going to work against clarity. So in that case, as a writer and as an editor, I might say, I know that you could put a comma here. I know a comma is supposed to go here, but it's going to be too many. So I am going to make a judgment call about where I'm going to take the commas out. As an editor, if I put a comma in, it is, it's to aid clarity. Or if I'm going to put a comma in, I'm going to put it in because I'm following a set of rules about commas. But if I'm going to take a comma out, I'm doing it for a reason. A comma that would normally be there, but I'm taking it out, I'm doing it for a specific reason, and that reason is to aid clarity. Just as I'm going to, I might screen share again here in a sec. And because I did type up a few sentences about that use commas, just to get at some of the sort of really basic rules or things that come up a lot as an editor. And it will illustrate some of what I'm saying here. Because there are a few ways that people always get confused about commas, myself included. So I've got my little commas document here. I'm going to share it. Okay. All right. Do you see my little document with some sentences on it? Yes? Everyone's good here? So, happy birthday, Mr. President. Generally speaking, you put a comma before somebody's name or a title. Hello, Gary. A lot of people don't use a comma there. They just put hello, Gary, but there should be a comma after it. Again, if it's informal writing in an email, oftentimes you don't use the apostrophe at the beginning of an email. But in literature, that's a rule. Same thing about. Yes. Sorry,
Amanda. Is this applicable to all styles, or is this specific to one specific style?
No, there are exceptions, but this is pretty universally applicable. Okay. Yes. Okay. These are what would be considered grammar rules, at least in North America. Sometimes Britain is a little bit different, especially about that and which. Britain can be different, but yes, these are pretty hard and fast rules. Putting a comma before please. May I have some more mashed potatoes, please? I'd like more mashed potatoes, please, if possible. So please is set in the middle of the sentence. It's got commas on both sides, but not if it's starting the sentence. Please, you don't go please, comma, pass the mashed potatoes. Just please pass the mashed potatoes. Here's a good example about commas being used to aid clarity. So, and a lot of people often have questions about this. Do you say my father Greg without the comma or my father Greg with the comma? You do put a comma in this case. My father Greg was a successful electrical engineer before he retired. You do put the comma in there because Greg is what's called an appositive. And there's only, my father and Greg are the same person. My father is just another name for Greg in this sentence, right? But if we look at these other examples, here's two differently punctuated sentences about my sister Rhonda. They're both correct. It really depends on the context. So if you just have one sister and her name is Rhonda, then it's just like the first sentence about my father Greg. My sister, comma, Rhonda has curly hair. I have one sister. Her name is Rhonda. She has curly hair. But what if you have more than one sister? Then Rhonda is no longer in a positive. You have my sister Rhonda has curly hair. But my sister Cynthia has straight hair. You don't use a comma because you have more than one sister, right? The idea here is that the comma is doing, I know, I can see Kit going, oh my gosh, this is insanity, this is nonsense. And that's okay because you know what, it's not your job to know all this stuff, it's my job to know this stuff, so it's all right. But in this instance, it's sort of interesting because the comma is not there arbitrarily. The comma is giving you information, right? In the third example, you should know by reading that there's only one sister. that she only has one sister. That's what the comma means, right? And then to take an example about, I'm going to skip the next ones. So, and was it Bonnie? Yeah, it was Bonnie about that versus which. Bonnie wrote in before the office hours. She said, I struggle with that versus which in sentences. This is a really common thing. And maybe some of you already know the explanation for this, but it's kind of a good example about how commas work. I've read the explanation and I think I get it, and then I get confused again. They went to the store that sold ice cream. They went to the store, comma, which sold ice cream. Maybe these examples are wrong, and what I'm confused with is when to use which. I'll look for examples in my own writing where ProWritingAid changed them to which, and a beta reader pointed them out. So, her sentences. Whoops, I'm going to go right here. They went to the store that sold ice cream. They went to the store which sold ice cream. Does anyone, I can't see everybody when I'm sharing the screen, but does anyone want to take a stab at these two sentences and what the difference between them is, or why you might use which for one and why you might use that for the other?
The first one implies that you have a choice of stores and you chose the one that has the ice cream. The second one implies that there's just a store and it happens to sell ice cream amongst other things.
Right.
But you know, I only know that because, I don't know, I grew up an English reader. I don't have rules in my head, but that's what it means to me.
Right. Well, and that's what I would say too. I mean, and again, that's a North American thing. In Britain, for example, they often use which instead of that, and they don't use a comma. They would say they went to the store which sold ice cream, and they're essentially using which the way in North America we would use the word that. But what Marianne said is the logic behind it. It was a hot day. We went to the beach. We were sweating. There were two general stores on the corner, but we went to the one that sold ice cream because we were hot and we wanted ice cream. So we went to the one that sold ice cream. But maybe it's like just went to the beach. We went to the store which sold ice cream. Hooray! We were thrilled. It sold ice cream. That's great. And again, this isn't, but I like this rule of thumb simply because, again, you can see that the comma is doing some work here. The idea is that it's giving you information about not just the sentence or where you would take a breath. It's giving you information about the store, essentially, which is a nice thing. One of the biggest, here's another little small kind of comma thing. If you look at this sentence, I lived in Halifax, Nova Scotia from July 12th, 1998 to April 7th, 2012. This is just another weird little thing that people don't always do or notice, but you put a comma after Halifax and you put a comma after Nova Scotia, even if you wouldn't normally put a comma there in the sentence, you always, after like a country or a province, you always put a comma after that. And it's the same with dates. If you use the actual numerical date, so from July 12th, comma, 1998, comma, to April 7th, comma, 2012. But if it was just July 1998, there would be no commas. There, I lived in Halifax, Nova Scotia from July 1998 to April 2012. Yeah, it'd be the same thing again if it was just Halifax, no commas. But I would say one of the bigger comma issues, and I really promise I'm going to stop talking about commas soon, is this issue of conjunctions. Has anybody heard the acronym fanboys? It's basically an acronym, or a mnemonic, so you can remember the main, what's called coordinating conjunctions. So fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or yet, and so. Coordinating conjunction, all a conjunction is a joining word. It joins two clauses or phrases so that you can have them in the same sentence. Two clauses that might, and oftentimes otherwise could stand alone as two separate sentences. So this example, the store closed down more than 60 years ago, but the gift box is still in perfect condition. So you really have two independent clauses here. The store closed down more than 60 years ago. And your other one is, the gift box is still in perfect condition. When you join those two independent clauses with a conjunction here, with a coordinating conjunction like but, then you put a comma before the but. If this second clause could not stand on its own as its own sentence, then you don't use a comma. The store closed down more than 60 years ago, but still lives on in our memories. Still lives on in our memory is not a sentence. It's just a phrase. It's a fragment. It would be a fragment on its own. So you don't use a comma before the coordinating conjunction. The store closed down more than 60 years ago, but still lives on in our memory. And it's the same in this next sentence. Marnie was exhausted after her night shift and wondered if it was time to switch careers. Oftentimes I see a lot of this. Marnie was exhausted after her night shift and wondered if it was time to switch careers. It seems like a natural pause, but wondered if it was time to switch careers is not an independent clause. So you actually wouldn't put a comma there. There are all kinds of conjunctions, however. Though the fanboys are your main coordinating conjunctions, but there's all kinds of conjunctions. Think about like because or since, after, under, whatever. I mean, there's millions of them, and because is one of the most common. They are what's called subordinating conjunctions, and what they do is different. Whereas the store closed down more than 60 years ago and the gift box was still in perfect condition, those are two separate statements. They're sort of equal. What a subordinating conjunction does is it connects phrases or clauses that have a relationship to each other. Maybe it's a cause and effect relationship. Maybe it's one clause is describing the other, is saying something about it, when something happened, or why something happened, or where something happened. When there's a relationship like that, then you use a subordinating conjunction. So because it was raining, they canceled the picnic. And I'll use the second one, which is simpler. They canceled the picnic because it was raining. Because is your conjunction here. But there's a relationship here. They canceled the picnic. That's the main action, a noun. They canceled the picnic. That's what's happening in the sentence. That's what's important. Because it was raining just explains why. That explains why they canceled the picnic, right? And so you don't use a comma there. If you switch them around and you started with because it was raining, then you're sort of switching the natural order of things, and so you would put a comma to signify that. The only time you use a comma before a because sentence is, again, if you need it to aid clarity. So take this sentence, and I really want to see what people would say here. What if there was no comma? I didn't go to the movie because my husband came home unexpectedly. Well, what are some ways you could interpret that sentence?
The movie was called Because My Husband Came Home Unexpectedly.
Sorry, the movie was what?
It was called Because My Husband Came Home Unexpectedly.
Right. I didn't go to the movie because my husband came home unexpectedly. On the one hand, it could mean I wanted to stay home with my husband. So he came home unexpectedly, so I didn't go to the movie, right? And if you put that comma in, that's what it means. My husband came home unexpectedly, so I didn't go to the movie. That's a cause and effect. But if you don't have the comma in, it could also mean I didn't go to the movie because my husband came home unexpectedly. I went to the movie because I had already made a date with my best friend and I didn't want to break it. In that sense, that sentence means two completely different things. It means something totally different without the comma. I didn't go to the movie because my husband came home unexpectedly. I wasn't trying to flee my husband. That's not why I went to the movie. I went to the movie because I had already made plans or whatever. So then in that sense, you need the comma in there because that's the only way the reader's going to truly know what you're saying. And it won't be open to interpretation. So sorry. I mean, everyone's probably gone to sleep by now. But that is the idea with commas, is they are supposed to do something. They are supposed to make it so that the reader can't just interpret the sentence the way they want. So they'll interpret it the way the author wants them to. But it's a total minefield, and I still make mistakes, and I still have to check things over and over again because I can't remember what the rule was. That's just the way it goes. That's okay. That's my job. And I like my job.
It does point out why the breathing rule can be problematic, though.
Yeah.
Because where I want to take a breath doesn't necessarily aid clarity, even though, I might be breaking rules. Actually, ProWritingAid seems to think I have it all backwards. She said.
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought up ProWritingAid. That was one of your questions, and I'm not really that familiar with ProWritingAid. I went on it. I sort of tried out some stuff, and it was really kind of interesting. I had a ton of fun with it. So I wouldn't mind knowing, and not everybody, I can't see everybody on the screen, but have a lot of you use ProWritingAid? Yeah. I wouldn't mind knowing just what you think about. What are your thoughts on it? What has your experience been like with it?
I think it's really good. It points out a lot of things, and it also explains why. So as someone who's not a professional editor, I feel like I've learned a lot working through it.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's not. Yeah, I'm sure it's not perfect because it's a program, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't expect to learn while I was doing it, but I am learning. I'm learning about my own bad habits. I'm learning about grammar, things I thought I knew and obviously don't. And but the question I asked you, Amanda, was, how much latitude is there? So if ProWritingAid is saying, well, this sentence is your I don't know, your sentence lengths are too long, or there's not enough variety, or you're using sticky words, or things that might affect pacing or voice or those sorts of things, like, where do you draw the line? How do you not get bullied by it into something generic and characterless? That's the essence of my question.
Yeah, I was really, I had a ton of fun with ProWritingAid, and I think it does things that an editor either can't or won't do, within a certain budget. The metadata is really fun, that it goes through and it gives you all these stats about your piece. Is kind of cool. It's like, oh, I use 5% more, noun-driven sentences than the average ProWritingAid user or the average published author. That's really cool, and it's kind of a rabbit hole, I guess, so it's dangerous maybe in that way too. You're looking at your stats, and one of the things I thought was really cool is that it probably does give you a sense of your specific tendencies. Like I say, every writer has tendencies, just like every editor has tendencies. But it was like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't even realize that I was repeating this phrase. I didn't even notice it the first time. That's really cool. And as far as I'm concerned, Alyssa, one of your questions that you posted for me was about glue words. And I was like, what in the heck is a glue word? And then I went, and there it was, a ProWritingAid glue words. And I said, any tool that's going to get people talking and thinking about things like glue words is good in my book. I mean, that's great. The more people are thinking about this stuff, and you do absorb it, and then the next time you're writing, you'll be thinking about that. You'll be mindful of it, which is a great thing. So I think it's a great thing to kind of run your writing through and see what comes up. Marianne, about your question, like I would say one place where it's a little weaker. I was actually kind of surprised I put in it, and it did catch some errors, but there were some simple errors it didn't catch, which I thought was sort of surprising, because I would think this to me isn't a controversial thing. To me, this is really like there's a missing something here and they didn't catch it. But I would feel like one of the biggest weaknesses of ProWritingAid, if you want to call it that, because you don't want to place all these expectations on it, but it's not awesome with context. So it'll say, oh, you're repeating this phrase, but it's like maybe you wanted to repeat that phrase in the, because you're setting up a certain rhythm. That's like a poetic, sort of turn of phrase, and ProWritingAid can't see that. They can't see that in the context of your paragraph or your story, and yeah, I mean, it's not a human. It doesn't have any subjective reaction to what you're writing. It doesn't say this made me feel great, or again, it's not going to, it does have neat things about warning you about telling or showing, but in general, it's not going to say, wow, this might not be grammatically perfect, but I loved the emotion here. I loved what's happening. I loved what's happening in this thing. So I don't even know if I can answer your question, Marianne, except to say, take it with a grain of salt. When I was looking at it, I felt like it was pretty clear when I wanted to take its suggestion and when I didn't. Like a lot of times I was like, wow, I totally didn't see that phrase was repeated in the last sentence. Awesome suggestion. I'm going to take it.
Sometimes we're not factoring in crippling insecurity, though.
What is the diagram that I saw? It was like the pie chart about a writer's mind, and like one half is like crippling insecurity, and the other half is like, total overconfidence, like I'm amazing, and then the other half is like I'm terrible, I suck, and I think that's very true, and I think it definitely comes out in editing, because on the one hand you're like, I'm doing all this stuff wrong, and on the other hand you're like, I don't want to change this, I like this. This person is telling me I'm doing it wrong, and I don't want to change it because I think it's brilliant, I think it's genius, whatever. So I mean, I guess I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know the answer to that question. It is a judgment call, but I mean, I would say don't think of ProWritingAid as being any kind of I think it's a great little voice, but that's all it is. To me, it's not going to be your be all and end all about, about the power of your prose or anything. Yep.
It's not putting you out of a job yet.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. That's what I would say.
I also was using Grammarly, and but I'll look into ProWritingAid. But what I was wondering, this should be a quick question, is there a source for creative words that are similar to in something else? So if I say she walked across the room, I'm looking for options for walked, like padded or tippy-toed or slithered. Right. I'm looking for, I want to use these words more naturally, but I want practice. So do you know if there's a source for this kind of thing? And does ProWritingAid offer words like that?
It does. It does. Yeah. I mean, some of that stuff is just a thesaurus, right? And most, I mean, even Microsoft Word, I believe it's like Control Shift. If you do Control Shift on a word in your document, you can, you know, a little pop-up will come up and you can choose synonyms and it will give you synonyms for that word. And ProWritingAid has the same function. It has a sort of thesaurus function, and and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of thesaurus might be a little more comprehensive because it might cover phrases as well as single words. I'm not sure.
Well, the thesaurus I have is they're not very creative words. They're
right.
Just a fun suggestion kit, not comprehensive, but are you on Pinterest?
Yeah.
Sometimes people put up an infographic. I don't know what kind of keywords, vocabs, try different things, but writers have created infographics for like all the different kinds of words you can use for brown, or all the different ways you can move across a room, or words instead of walk, that sort of thing. So it's pretty random, hit and miss, but you might find some fun, you know, creative tools there.
Mm-hmm.
And what would I search again?
I don't know, synonyms, writing style guides, or out of creative writing, to try different search words. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
A kind of neat source, and someone please jump in, because I'm not going to describe this properly. And I believe it's Angela Ackerman's. She has like an emotional thesaurus. Is that what it's called?
There are many thesaurus that they've put together. The emotion thesaurus is just one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah. But they have a website now that you can kind of subscribe to and access all the thesaurus together, and a bunch of other tools for plotting or character, or I haven't even looked at all of them yet. It's quite a good tool, a set of tools.
Right. And that's a little different, you know, but.
Yeah, the website's called One Stop for Writers.
Oh, good. Thank you, Marianne. That's great. I knew there was a website, but I did not know what it was called. So that's great. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I actually meant to make this disclaimer at the beginning about, I feel like sometimes one thing that people pay me for is just to look stuff up. I don't know the answers to everything, and even if I do know them at one point, I forget them. I forget these little rules, these little pesky rules, and so people pay me just to spend the time to look things up over and over again, so that they don't have to, and they don't have to spend the time doing that, which is a totally legitimate thing to do. Yeah. So that's what it is sometimes. Sometimes it is just, I Google. I don't even have a specific place I always go. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I just have to search around and Google. Alyssa, I know you had a question you posted about these glue words, about trying to reduce the number of glue words. Do you want to just explain for people who might not know what those are?
So it's something that ProWritingAid flags, and it's basically if you have a sentence that doesn't have particularly strong words in it, like if you have a sentence like, she walked to the door and opened it, it'd be like, you'd say there's too many glue words, there's no vivid words in there.
Yeah. Or a lot of little words together.
Yeah. So some of these sentences, you read them and you're like, well, I can't think of any way to change this.
She picks it up and puts it over there. Like, doesn't say anything at all, right? Except we sometimes write that way just by default, because we're not crafting in that moment. We're just telling the story or something, right?
And sometimes it is just the most efficient way to say, like, and you're just trying to get your character from point A to B. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you look at it and you're like, okay, how could I reword this so that it's stronger?
Mm-hmm. I don't have a really amazing answer to that question. I just really like that question because I think it is true. And even as an editor, I struggle with glue words. I have glue words that I'm wedded to, and I know I'm not supposed to use them. And like for me, my big stumbling block is the word that.
Oh, me too. Oh, I was just going to ask you about that.
I'm trying to think of a good example. It's the tendency now is to people say don't use it.
It speeds up the.
You don't need to use the word that. What's a good? I should have done this in advance. But what's a good sentence? Oh, like something like this. I didn't know you were back from your vacation, or I didn't know that you were back from your vacation, right?
Yeah,
so,
I do that all the time.
Yeah, my tendency is to write, I didn't know that you were back from your vacation. But a lot now the tendency is like, that is a glue word. It's a glue word. You don't need it in there. It's just an extra short, meaningless word. And you can just say, I didn't know you were back from your vacation. And so some things like that. And even now, sometimes I'll still leave it in. I'll be like, I am dying on this hill. I'm sticking to my guns. I think it works better with that. Because when I read it without it, I get tripped up. I have to go back and I have to read the sentence again. And if I had to do that, then it's interrupting the flow. And so I'm going to, even though that is essentially an invisible word, I'm going to keep it in because I do feel like it makes a sentence easier to understand. But a lot of times it doesn't.
It's a habitual thing, for your ear. I agree with you. I'm a part of the that camp. But when ProWritingAid shows me how many that's I use,
yes,
I can be persuaded to take some of them out.
Exactly.
But I think that the deciding thing could very well be just the feel of the sentence in your mouth, or like the rhythm of it, the cadence. Do you need that extra little? Don't you when you read it out loud? And sometimes you might want it there just because it's too. I don't know.
Yeah. So I don't know, like Alyssa, I don't have a good answer for you because I feel like I do just what Marianne said, which is I sort of judge these things case by case. But one thing I will say is that I like this idea of glue words because it's not just glue words. There are glue phrases. There are whole phrases that think of something like a little bit. A lot of people like a little bit. I was a little bit this, or I did this a little bit, or a bit. People try to be more concise and they just put a bit in. But you could probably take out a little bit altogether. And then you are writing and you are making a statement, and you're not making it milder. You're not tempering it.
Most qualifiers weaken prose.
Right.
I feel confident saying that.
Yeah. Or somewhat.
Qualifiers.
Yeah. Somewhat or quite. I was quite happy with that. It's like, and I get why people sort of cling to it. It's like maybe a little more subtle than saying, I'm happy with that.
But how much do we do that because it's stylistic, and how much do we do it because we're, I don't know.
I mean, there's always justifications and there's always, reasons not to do something. So again, it's a judgment call. But this, my joke about why I don't like the word as when it chooses subordinated conjunction is for this exact reason. I don't mind the word as. It's used in all kinds of ways. But one way it's used as a replacement for a word like because or since. We didn't go to we didn't have a picnic as it was raining. We didn't have a picnic as it was raining. And when the meaning here is that we didn't have a picnic because it was raining. And to me, to say we didn't have a picnic because it was raining is much more powerful. It's just punchier. As is sort of like, well, it could mean while it was raining. We didn't have a picnic while it was raining. As could mean all sorts of different things in that context, and they all just sound kind of blah. Whereas we didn't, it's like stick to your guns. Say what you want to say what you mean, and make sure that everybody knows it. So yeah. But it's about context, and it's a judgment call. And that's one thing that editors do too. They make judgment calls all the time about this sort of thing. And again, the author has the final say, which they absolutely should. And to me, that's the beauty of it. Editing is not about, it's sometimes about right and wrong when you're at the mechanical stuff, but it's really about making a choice. And that is oftentimes it's a subjective thing. It's making a choice.
Amanda, if you have a character, like I have a short story where the character talks in long rambling things, and she adds like 16 descriptors, and that's consistently her voice to the story, then that's okay when you're in the voice of the character or you're in dialogue to break those rules, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, then you've made a conscious decision. I mean, what was the example? It's like, when Mark Twain is writing, his writing is filled with all these weird grammatical things because he's made a conscious choice about voice. And it's not that he doesn't know any better. Of course he knows better. He makes the choice.
True for Shakespeare and Dickens and,
That's
like
right. Every
how a character speaks.
Yeah. Every author, every writer, even if they don't know they're doing it, they're making a decision about
Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice. I mean, you wouldn't advocate that kind of speech ever, but he wouldn't be him without the way he mangles and ties knots and language, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, totally. I mean, as long as you're doing consciously, and as I said, as long as you can get away with it, then that again is like, maybe you don't know if you can get away, because I might say, yes, in theory, Leslie, you're absolutely right. You've made a decision about this character, but maybe you would give me the manuscript, and as a reader, I would say, I don't even understand what he's saying. And so, well, maybe that's the limit. Maybe that's the limit. It's like, I can see what you're trying to do with this character. I can see that you've made him like this on purpose. But if I can't even understand what he's trying to communicate, unless that's your intention, well, then you might have to pull back on that a little bit, or you might consider removing this sentence just so that his overall point doesn't get lost in the shuffle or whatever it may be. Same it is about being able to get away with it.
Same kind of rule applies if you want a character or even a narrator, for that matter, to speak in a particular accent or dialect. It can't be a true transcript of the sound of a person speaking. It has to be some kind of, you have to make some sort of artistic judgment about how you can convey as few deviations from normal, clear language as possible. And you can, but it takes work, right?
Yeah, it's and again, it goes back to the thing about, if you know the rules, then you can break them if you want to break them, as long as you know why you're doing it. Anyway. Well, we've kind of gone way over time here. I'm so happy that we had such a lively conversation, and I actually can see, someone saying that there should be a weekly class about grammar. And I don't know, maybe that's something. I don't know if Crystal would, and Donna and Eileen. I don't know if that's, maybe I could even just do a little.
Yes.
Yeah, you think that would be good?
I guess we're all word nerds, so yeah.
Well, look, I've got my nerdy Pride and Prejudice t-shirt on. I wore that in honor of our office hours today, and because I am a nerd. I was laughing. I woke up my daughter. I was laughing so hard last night. I was just doing a little bit of research to prepare for today, and some of the thing, there was talking about this tendency in journalism to rephrase. They don't want to repeat themselves. They don't want to repeat a name or a word, so they will keep using synonyms for something. So they'll say Julia Roberts was in Hollywood today to film her new movie, and then they won't say she. They'll say the actress who starred in Pretty Woman did this, and then the next sentence it'll be some other. The embattled mother said this about, and they don't want to repeat. And so they had these really ridiculous examples about, one was like an article in the Liverpool Echo about carrots, and they were like, what was it? The popular orange vegetables. and referring to it was an article about an Easter egg hunt, referring to it as a hen fruit safari. The hen fruit safari. And I was losing it laughing, and I was thinking, I'm such a nerd. I find this stuff so funny. Anyway, but that is an example of elegant, what they call elegant variation gone horribly wrong. You know, don't do this, just say it or she. That's totally fine. Anyway, okay, but yeah, so maybe we'll wrap it up, and maybe what I'll do, there were some questions that we didn't even get to, and I'm happy to sort of type something up, and I can just post it if people are interested. And yeah, and maybe we'll see about making this a more regular thing. I would totally love that. All right. Well, if that's it, I guess I'll say goodbye. And you guys are, I guess, free if you want to continue this conversation without me. But
thank you, Amanda. That was
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so pleased. All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.